Welcome to Arbory Digital Experiences. This is episode 12, and today we're going to cover what roles are needed for a successful AEM implementation. And so on this particular podcast, what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the roles involved in AEM, which in a lot of cases could be extrapolated out to basically any other digital experience platform, whether you're talking Sitecore, you're talking Drupal, you're talking Optimizely, Contentful, whatever. In any of those implementations, a lot of these roles are going to be the same. Some of them are not going to be the same. Some of them are specific to AEM, but we're going to go through all of them. Now, and this is, we really want to go over what you need to do to be successful, not just a one-off sort of a project type of a thing, but if you're a site owner, what also do you need to be continuously successful? What skill sets? What are the differences between them? So on and so forth. What are the ones that you should have in-house, and what are the ones that are even appropriate to hire out for, or should be hired out for, or you're only going to do it in a pinch? And the audience, the sort of people that I would love to listen to this if you could, is not just AEM site owners for sure, but also recruiters or anyone involved in technical personnel. Because if you are a recruiter who's ever sent an email to some potential AEM candidate, and I really just please plug this in, take a walk around the block, give this a listen, because I'm gonna make it worth your while. Now, as a disclaimer, I work for a digital services agency as a solution architect and an AEM architect, so you should know that. But at the same time, I've also worked in-house as an in-house staff engineer for various sites directly. So on one site all the time. I've been a managed hosting guy, and I've been a product owner, UX designer, copywriting, personnel, stuff like that. So I've kind of worn a lot of different hats in this. So I'm going to try to make this relevant to anybody. Hope this is going to be helpful. With me today, I've got Hank Toby, who is the Director of Business Execution at Arbory Digital. And Hank, you have not particularly been in AEM recently, but you have been in a, I guess, an analogous sort of a big site of late. This is
sure.
Yeah.
So a lot of these same roles are filled at the job I'm currently at, where I'm a project manager, but there's slight differences between what we're running over there and what we'll be talking about here with AEM specific roles and the breakdown of those roles.
Yeah. And this is, I guess too, we could a whole nother podcast on the differences between AEM and other, you've got monolithic, big monstrosities, kind of like AEM. You got ones that are super composable, like what you've got with the company where you're at right now, where they're based on,
it's Strappy
CMS. That's right. Mm-hmm. And then you've got other things that have plugged into it, where you've got, yes, it takes a lot of specialized skill to learn AEM, but it also takes a lot of specialized skill to learn that whole layout of everything that you've got, because learning AEM is one thing, but at least if you learn AEM, then you can be useful on another AEM project. But if you just learn Strappy and you try to move in to your infrastructure, it's not like you're totally hitting the ground running and you're useful. Right. What would you say is the average length of time it takes to have somebody be genuinely like, okay, good, I can give this person really understands what's going on here, and I can give them something to do?
Yeah, I was recently talking about this with one of my colleagues at our customer, and we were thinking it was at least 6 to 9 months, which is pretty crazy to think about it, but it's that's what we both thought it would take to really get your hands dirty on the system and really fully understand it.
Yeah.
So
see, the thing is that that's what that's where there's not a one size fits all, and there's not a cure all in any of these personnel discussions and project discussions, because you can't necessarily just say, hey, we're going to just hire 6 developers who know Strappy, and then they're going to just be useful on this 6-month project, because at the end of 6 months, they're barely going to be really understanding how the whole system works. So
I do think if it's a more compartmentalized project where there's a set goal and it's do X task, and then we're kind of going to run it on our own. That's a little bit easier. Starting from scratch is a little bit easier, but especially when you're moving into an existing infrastructure, I could see that ramp up taking a lot longer.
Yeah, indeed. And that's, I mean, I guess that, so we're going to go through a bunch of these different roles in this podcast, and we're going to try to talk through, you know, what are the specifics of what they should do. But one of the themes I want to keep coming back to is whether or not it's a thing that it really makes sense to have at your company. When does it make sense to have it, and when does it make sense to hire it, or when does it make sense to bring in an agency that does that thing? I mean, it's a little bit analogous. I mean, before the podcast, you know, we're talking about home renos. I mean, and that's one of these things too, where it's like there's specialized skills in all of that too. And when you talk about, like, for example, you know, like, so you're going to put copper downspouts on the side of your house. That, like, copper downspouts, people who know how to work copper gutters, that's its own career, basically. And if you know gutters, you don't know copper gutters, right? And so we could learn how to do copper gutters, but why? You're going to be able to do that, learn that skill, you know, arduously, and be able to do it exactly one time. You know what I mean? So
that's a perfect analogy, I think.
So yeah, so we're gonna try to keep it real on that, on each one of these, and which are the ones that you should definitely keep. And I guess in starting that off, I got a big list of things. I'm going to try to go through these. I think I've got most of the roles, but I really hope that if somebody wants to bring in a role that they're like, hey, you didn't mention this role, and it's totally vital, and why don't you bring this up? Then please leave a comment or just reach out, because well, I mean, heck, maybe I'll just have you on the podcast and you can explain your role. But starting from the top, so you've got, in any site implementation, any big AEM site, or this would also be applicable with any other digital experience platform, is you're going to have a project or product owner who is there calling the shots and running the show. And this is a person who so this is the person who hires the people, who is the one who is managing the budget of things, who's setting the big, broad goals for what's going to get done and so forth. And this person is almost going to be uniformly a full-time employee of that company. This is out of all these roles here, that's the only one really that is I've never ever seen that outsourced. I've never seen the entire ownership of a site outsourced. Besides,
what is the typical title of someone who is the product owner or project owner?
I mean, this is usually somebody who's either, I mean, in some cases they're a VP, in some cases they are an AVP, in some cases they're a technical director. They're almost always director level or above. Because in any large site, and we're mostly dealing with large companies when we're talking about AEM. We're not talking about a small WordPress site. Because a small WordPress site, you know, the person who owns it is like the dentist, and you know what I mean. And that's totally different. And yes, you can totally outsource that kind of stuff. Because yeah, if you're that, you don't have a technical director, vice president of information systems when you run a dental office. But in this case, you're talking about massive IT organizations, and yes, the person who owns the .com for a major brand is going to generally be a director or a VP of some sort. They, and a lot of times, depending on the size of the company, a lot of times they will have sometimes even VPs or directors and so forth below them. And depending on the size, again, you could have directors in terms of who are running QA. You have a director who is just running site reliability or something like that. I mean, these trees can send their roots pretty deep in terms of how big do you grow this out. But again, the leadership level there, the person who's calling the shots, who's saying what technologies are we going to use, what personnel are we going to use, what's our budget, and all that sort of stuff. That person is going to be a full-time employee. Now, below that, well, not necessarily just below that, but I guess the next one to talk through with respect to the thing that you're implementing is this title of solution architect. And the solution, so whenever you're trying to figure out what is it that you're going to buy and what is it you're going to implement, this is something that you need somebody with extremely broad depth. They need to be deep and broad in terms of technologies that they know. And if you're talking about an individual technology like the Adobe Experience Cloud stack, you need somebody who knows everything that it can do, everything that it's possible that it can do, and everything, every way that it can be implemented and misimplemented. And ideally, that's the sort of individual who's brought in before things are purchased. Ideally, before things are purchased.
Tad, this is typically your role, right?
Yes. Well, now these days, yes. And because I mean, I've been an architect on projects, and then, but a lot of times I get brought in now on this because I mean, it is another hat that I wear. If this is kind of this sales buffer hat, because in some cases, the person who's coming in with both guns blazing is going to be the technical sales on a given tool. And the people who generally have technical architects, solution architects to spare are ones that are trying to sell a solution into a company. They're going to say all the things that the solution can do right. They're not necessarily going to talk about any of the downsides. And so so if you're a big company with a big technical footprint, a lot of times you have an enterprise architecture arm or organization or something like that, which is in charge of managing all these different stacks that you have. And so we have our Adobe stack, and here's what we use. We have Chef that runs our deployments, and we've got this, and here's our database stuff. And whenever somebody wants to sell into this, that person is in charge of holistically going, where does this plug in? And does this work? Let me understand it. All this. Yes. Now here's the solution that we want to do. They're the ones who are being that buffer at that point. But it's only the super large organizations that really have that role sufficiently, staffed. Anything smaller, and a lot of that you have to bring somebody in. Mm-hmm. And this is a role that's super hard to have on staff full time for a smaller company. I mean, by smaller, I'm talking about a few thousand employees, or even up to 10, 15,000 employees or something like that.
Right.
Smaller, yeah, smaller, right? But so that's how many employees you have, but how many people do you really have in your marketing organization is a different thing, right? So if you have some big manufacturing company or something like that, yes, you might have tons and tons of people that work in your plants. Those aren't people who are running your website. So, and those guys, those they don't have an infinite marketing budget. So, so you can't necessarily you have to have projects happening all the time to keep a solution architect busy with saying, good, how do I design this next one? And that's generally somebody who's then going to be working for an agency, who you're going to bring in and say, now, these people also work for Adobe as an example, but that's well, they do, they totally do. And some of them are super great. But the problem is they also work for Adobe, and they're part of the sales arm, which is trying to sell a solution into the company. And so a lot of times I end up having to be brought in to kind of pump the brakes on things where a contract gets signed, and it's like, whoa, you don't want to sign that contract just yet, because this is a 1-year contract. It's going to take me or any team, 6 to 8 months to implement this thing. You're only going to have 3 months of this service that you just paid a year for left by the time this thing's done. So don't buy it now. Like, buy it in 8 months or whatever. Like, and that gets salespeople mad, but it's fine. It's the right call. And so you have to have somebody who's there to understand all these different pieces. And a lot of times that means different tools. You have whatever. You have all kinds of different tools that end up going into any implementation. So you have to have somebody who understands a bunch of that.
That's a potential benefit of working with a third party like ourselves to come and be that more unbiased opinion in the room, as opposed to working with like Adobe's managed services or the architect.
That's true. That's true. And so yeah, I guess that's a plug for what I do is like to I like to be able to be a buffer like that, to be able to have somebody do something that makes sense. But once you've got a plan, like once you're like, here's what we're going to implement, and it's going to be implemented in this way. We're going to use these tools. It's going to take about this long. We need about this many people. Here's the general plan. Generally, the best thing to do too is to do these things. You've got a planning and an implementation plan. They're two separate plans. Sometimes they're two different crews that are doing this, because you don't want to start an implementation plan that has or an implementation project that has a planning component, because the implementation has already started and you're like, hold on, we just planned it. Now we found out that we need 7 developers and not 2. And then it takes time to bring some of these guys online. I mean, even big shops don't necessarily have, 20 AEM developers sitting on the bench just waiting for your call. Operators are standing by, kind of a thing. Like you need time to be able to put those guys together. So I definitely recommend doing them in pieces. Though once you got a plan, then you kind of get to this next person, or this next role, which is probably one of the most ambiguous roles that I've got here, which is the AEM Architect. And so an AEM Architect, similar to any other software title architect, kind of gets thrown all over the place in terms of what do they want. Like if I get a job thrown at me and said, hey, I'm looking for an AEM Architect, I'm like, what does that mean exactly? What do you want exactly? Like, an AEM Architect should understand the full breadth of the product. They should understand everything that it does. They should and this is where they also need to be able to lead a development team. They need to be able to do the doing of running the project and do the project as well. But what kind of is the difference? And you and I were talking about this earlier, and this is super astute what you were saying earlier on the difference between a developer and an architect. And I never really. Different between the tech lead or lead developer and an architect is really that the architect has to have seen enough to know, really, to be able to make a pretty good call on everything that a piece of software can do. So that if somebody says, well, should we use AEM to connect to connect to this backend database and store it in, like, well, I know AEM can do that. AEM shouldn't do that, and I've seen it, and it catches on fire, and we shouldn't do it that way. You know what I mean? So you need to know enough about that. A lead developer, yes, needs to be able to do the doing of all that sort of thing, but the architect needs to be able to sit, one level up. Besides that, yes, needs to be able to go in there and pitch in and say, oh, you need me to write this service, I'll write this service. Or you need me to go and configure this thing.
There's definitely that aspect of experience and skill that might actually align the two in a lot of ways, especially on the experience side. But then there's those soft skills too, right?
Yeah.
And being able to be that bridge between business and have those communication paths.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And so because you've done project manager and kind of and BA to a degree at your current role too. And a lot of times I find that as an architect, you end up kind of having to be a little bit of a BA also, of like, oh, you want this feature? Well, give me a second to decompose that feature into what it's going to be. Okay, good. So, Charlie, or, whatever, Sridhar or whatever, like how long do you think it's going to take to do that thing? Okay. Oh, so, okay. And you come back and say, good, it's going to take us 6 months to make it like that. Can we, do it a little bit smaller, or whatever it is, like to set functional and business, to be that bridge on business requirements and stuff too. But the other soft skill is debugging personnel and making sure personnel have what they need to be effective. Because a lot of times like if you got a team of, let's say you got 5 developers and maybe a QA person or something like that are working, right? Those 5 people are going to be doing random unproductive stuff without somebody really technical who can get with any single one of them and say, hey, so at sprint planning this week, so when we were talking about that feature, what did you get out of that? Oh, you totally didn't understand. Great. All right, let's clear that up right now. You know what I mean? Because sometimes even the most talented people, they'll get bugged and they don't want to talk about being bugged. You know what I mean? It's embarrassing. So, and different people have different, responses to that sort of thing too. So being able to get in and work with a team and keep the whole team productive is kind of your job also. Yes, you could say it's a PM job, and a super on it, highly technical PM can do that too. But I think you're asking a lot. You're almost saying, okay, all right, architect, I want you to be a PM if you're going to have them do that role.
And in my experience, everything works best when the project manager and the architect or the project lead, or hopefully all three, are very much on the same page. And
yes,
steering the team towards the same goal.
That's right.
I think that's really a lot of the leadership on a project. So,
yeah, and it's so again, yeah, I think that sales deflector is also kind of a inherent in the AEM architect role to a degree too, because that'll come in and somebody will try to sell into something. This is where an AEM architect, I think, can work well either as a hired gun or as a full-time employee. And a lot of times you do need, in larger sites, it's important to have somebody who's wearing that. And basically in almost any good-sized organization, it's important to have an architect on staff, because a lot of times just the full-time, just what goes on is some VP will like, hey, I went to a conference and they told me all about this great thing, and it uses AI to something or other, and the architect is like, okay, good, I've used this and it doesn't actually work. It's like, or guess what? It's irrelevant. This tool sounds great on a spreadsheet or on a PowerPoint or whatever, but it's irrelevant. So,
right.
so
I feel like an architect also works well, at least in some of the past projects Arbory's done, where they kind of come in, point the team in the right direction, like more of a consulting situation, and then are able to back out or not be so on top of everything, maybe not 40 hours a week.
It's true. So,
and I mean, I like that model for architects as well.
I do, and I want to hope that it's long-term financially viable, because it's one of these ones where I after being a consultant in many different capacities, I hate when a solution is sold in that is so complex that it requires huge staffs of people to continuously work it, and I would much prefer to work myself out of a job and make a company be successful. And when I'm brought back in, it's to do something new and cooler, and to add functionality that really brings value, as opposed to. I think
we've seen that with some of the customers you're working with right now.
Yep. I've got one project right now that I happen to be I'm very pumped about it. It's probably the most pumped I've been about a development project in a long time, and a lot of new tech, working directly with Adobe on it, and I do very wholeheartedly feel like the next engagement that we have on it is going to be to build new stuff, and it's not going to be just, all right, it's going to keep breaking, you're going to have to keep calling me, and like it's not going to be that. We're going to just be building newer and cooler stuff. So it's something that I'm very excited about. So yes, I think it should be. The other thing I wanted to say, though, I think I've said a couple of times, like this whole sales deflector thing. I do want to make sure I have to do the opposite also. And sometimes you have to chase, because sometimes salespeople are notoriously difficult to get hold of when you actually do want to buy something. And I've had that experience recently too, where I'm like, we need this product and we need it right now. And then you gotta everybody is used to this whole long sales process where you just, you get this, and then you actually no, I already know what I want. I want that thing. You sell me the thing right now. Give me the price. Well, I don't know if we can give you the price right now. Nope, give me the price. Time to buy it. So you have to kind of go both ways on that too, and tell the company you're working for, no, we need this now. We don't need this later. We need this right now. And so there is that piece too that it does, again, fit into that architect hat. So
you're sometimes the sales guy's best friend and sometimes their worst enemy, depending on that value to add.
That's right. So yeah. I hope I don't make too many enemies who I've torpedoed sales deals. Hey, no, I'm also very good for sales deals. Just remember. but yeah, so the next one on the list is an AEM developer, and so this is one where again, depending on the needs, this can be more than one thing. AEM developer is super specialized skill. It's not, so if you take your average like CS major coming out of college, and let's say they learn Java in college, they're not instantly viable as an AEM developer. You can make them into an AEM developer, but AEM development has there's a lot of tribal knowledge, a lot of domain specific skill that's involved. AEM's got its own templating language, which is different than anything else that you have to know. In addition to your out of the box kind of CSS and JavaScript type stuff, heavy duty Java, a lot of times you need to know lots of other things because you're connecting to other things. So you need to know how to get in and out of various APIs. You need to know how to talk to SQL, because half the time you've got some crazy, 15-year-old SQL database that you're trying to extract things out of, and run with. So it's definitely a skill to know what you need in terms of, is this person going to be primarily front end or primarily back end, is important to define when you're defining the skills that you need for a particular project. Because front end guys are especially these days with the advent of much more of this edge delivery stuff. Edge delivery is new tech from Adobe that's replacing. It's the direction that Adobe wants a lot of the front end to go. In the future, they're like, in the future everything's going to be edge delivery. I don't think it will be, but a lot will be. There's a lot of things that get kind of shoehorned where kind of the all I've got's a hammer, so everything's a hammer kind of a thing. That AEM gets used for that a lot right now. Like, we need a microsite. I've got AEM. It's like, nah, it wouldn't be the best for this thing. So edge delivery is something that I could get a CS grad out of college and say, yo, you're going to be my new edge delivery front end person. Are you sharp? Can you learn new stuff fast? How's your CSS? Like, good, great. Put you to work. So that sort of thing is, and that is one of the big pluses on edge delivery is how quickly you can get people up to speed.
Have you ever worked in projects where the back-end developers and front-end developers are the same people, where there's a lot of cross-function between those teams? Is it just on the size of the project and what the ask is? Or
it depends on the size of the project, yes. It depends on the relative skills and proclivities of the people involved. Because sometimes you got people who really, like a good front-end person, it's its own, like, it's funny, because back in the olden days, webmasters, you could just kind of be a jack of all trades and you could kind of do everything. Full stack, yeah, right. Full stack with AEM is kind of a lie. You basically, you're saying I can't really do anything very well, because back end development, especially doing it well, and especially doing it where you're not going to cause a massive reliability problem later, is its own total skill. And then front end developers, and I've seen those guys go, and I'm not a front end developer, and those guys are wizards, and it's its own skill. So yes, there is overlap, and just kind of like DevOps, where you have to have the operations guys and the developers speaking the same language with a lot of the same goals and so forth. You have to have, it's dev in that case. You have to have those guys also on the same page, but not necessarily be the same people.
Okay.
But on that subject too, in terms of the specialities of those, you've got other AEM technologies that require their own developer skills. Like, so AEM forms, but sometimes you'll see, we need an AEM forms developer. So AEM as a product can make a form, right? You can make a form with core components and make a form. That's not AEM forms. AEM forms, confusingly, is its own complete product. It used to be called Lifecycle. It was, and now it's mostly in the cloud service, basically a brand entirely new product. But it's for doing things like adaptive forms and PDF generation and things like that you would need if you were a bank or a healthcare provider. Like, hey, I'm going to generate, based on this data that you input, I'm going to generate a legal document for your new insurance policy that goes to Adobe Sign. You electronically sign, and that goes to all the different places that it needs to go. This is for like the real deal digital transformation stuff. Like for a lot of times I hate that word because it gets used for total random stuff. Like designing a new website is digital transformation. I don't
give me a lot of things.
Give me no, but no, real deal digital transformation of it is if it was a silly manual. Okay, I take this and I stamp it and this and it goes over here, triplicate, carbon copy. Like if it was that, and now it's this fancy system where the whole thing can happen self-service with no personnel involved, and you just got to have somebody who's monitoring it all. That's transformative because you can do things that where you said, okay, well, we can process one of these applications within 2 weeks, and now you can process it within 24 hours. Like that's a big deal for a company. So that's forms. That's its own skill. So if you need forms development, you need an AEM forms developer who's worked with this stuff because it is its own whole domain that you kind of need to know about. There's crossover.
What industries have you worked with where forms is the main, or is a bigger deal than others?
Well, basically any place where there are documents that go around. So financial services, healthcare. I mean, even some types of purchases and so forth require forms that cruise around and stuff like that. But personnel, hiring and stuff like that, that's another one. But for the most part, a lot of that, FinServ and healthcare are massive forms. And in fact, I would say, I don't know, 75% of the ones that I've worked on have had an AEM forms license. So, and a lot of times it's underutilized, unfortunately. Forms is expensive. But what's really expensive is not using it. Buying it and not using it, that's really expensive. But then one thing that almost everybody has is assets, and doing assets development in some cases is its own thing, and really utilizing assets is its own thing. So sometimes that busts out into other sub specialities like with assets, taxonomy is a big deal. How you name things, how you put things together, ways that you enforce taxonomy, ways that you say, good, well, anything that goes into this folder is automatically tagged in this way. I'm going to manage my taxonomy in this way, so that you end up with another job with larger sites of information architect, which is its own job, not even necessarily AEM domain specific. So somebody who does IA work could do it in many other fields, and a lot of times it's super good. It's a big information architecture book that I read once, and I'm like, wow, this is a super big job. I'm glad this is not my job, because there's a lot to this, there's a lot to think of. And so like there's a big healthcare company that I work for, and this is a job where they even have a separate product which manages their taxonomy and makes sure that nobody starts tagging things in this way that could get them in trouble or could be confusing, because it doesn't have to do so that's its own thing. But forms, assets. Okay, good. Well, then that gets us on to our next thing, which is QA. So, and this is something that spreads the gamut between AEM world and any other DXP is a good QA. And you've got and this is an engineering job. A lot of times though, you got somebody who's doing QA for you. You want somebody who you're not going to have to train on AEM from scratch, because otherwise that's a tough hill to climb in the middle of a project. And I've experienced that on a number of occasions. This is where you got to get.
You're saying you want an AEM-experienced QA engineer, ideally.
That's right. It doesn't have to be somebody who's got AEM QA in their title someplace. That would be an arbitrary. And I've had hiring managers try to say, oh, well, we need to get an AEM developer as our QA. And I'm like, you don't, not really. But having somebody who's actually seen it and worked in such a system is a really good idea. Because there's a lot of gotchas, and you have to know what to test. Also, that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest problem too with QA is that if you're going to go and say, good, here's my site, and here's the way we migrated from the old one to the new one, and here are the language models. So we used to be locale based, and now we're language based, and this and this. Good. I want you to set up your test cases for this. And they have to know, they have to be able to run with that, because otherwise, if you're having to think through as an architect or as a lead or something like that, all the test cases, and now you're the QA. So you don't want them to be just a QA robot, because I've also seen that too, where you have somebody who isn't necessarily a developer and they don't know what to test. They can script, but they don't really know what they're doing. And then it's kind of a QA at that point. It's kind of a camouflaged hole. It's not really like, you're like, oh, I got QA happening. It's QA, but it's not really. Yeah, you need somebody who's thinking through these things in advance, and ideally generating. So in AEM too, there's a lot of different hooks to be able to go and put things in CI/CD along the way, where you say, good, when this deployment runs, I want to use whatever Sauce Labs or something like that to go and click through this thing and do an automated test just to make sure I didn't break anything with this deployment. And so somebody who can plug into that sort of a pipeline is huge, because then you could massively increase the velocity of your deployments safely. Because then you can say, good, I can deploy this. I can deploy this twice in the same day if I want to. I know, because when the deployment runs, it's already run a test to say if I broke anything major. So all I have to do is test the things that I changed. So it's kind of a big deal to have a good QA engineer. So so next up, so authors. So we've mostly talked so far about all of the development that goes into developing on AEM, and I guess this is where it's kind of similar to the environment that you've been in that you've got all these other places where data needs to go in and where data needs to be moved around and all that kind of stuff, which that's its own kind of domain specific skill with AEM, because you need to know how to tag, how to use components, how to composite a page based on blocks of composable, like, okay, this component does this specific thing, or if you're working edge delivery, this block can be used in this certain way, and then they're used to developing on that. I would say an AEM author, the more classic way, not the edge delivery way, is a deeper learning curve. So if you have somebody who's doing that, it's really important to have somebody who's worked in that environment who can also train other authors, because a lot of times, because AEM is not a super simple system. So having somebody who can train authors on that is kind of important.
Now, are authors and front-end developers a similar role, or authors more akin to like almost the marketing team, for example? They're
more on the marketing side. They're going to be ones who are actually inputting and compositing all the content that's there. And a lot of times too, you have assets administration that goes into that, where you've got, let's just say you've got a big brand, like a sports brand or something like that, and you've got or you've got a brand that does whatever, physical products or manufacturing or something like that. We've got a bunch of products. So you have places where all those images are stored. You have photo shoots that are done. You have product images that sometimes need to be done in different languages and stuff like that. So administering all that and getting the content in there is not usually at all part of the development team. But there's interfacing that gets done, because whenever there is a new feature that gets rolled out, then there's training and so forth and so. So the larger the team, the more that has to be kind of formalized as a role. Sometimes there is somebody who's kind of the main person who's involved in, like, kind of the scrum master of the development team, ends up being the person who writes the release notes for the authors and says, okay, we just rolled out this new component. It's a new video player. Totally doesn't work like your old video player. What you do is, and then shows them how to use it and how to organize things. I've seen that work pretty well. But then all that authoring is generally completely detached from your development team. If it's all part of the development team, then that's kind of a car crash. So there's a lot of other, I guess, adjacent to AEM roles, which I've also seen get kind of Sometimes it makes a lot of sense to have somebody who knows AEM, and sometimes it makes no sense to have somebody to require that the person knows AEM in order to say you have to, you have to be an AEM guy in order to be on our site, kind of a thing. So one of them that you do need AEM specific skill is so in AEM you've got two totally separate products. One which is cloud service, one which is AEM self-hosted or on-premise, which is currently AEM 6.5. So between 6.5 and cloud service, if you're running 6.5, you basically need somebody. You either need a company who's managing that whole hosting of it and all of the care and feeding of AEM. You need somebody who's doing that. Shameless plug, Arbory does that. Or you need a whole team on site who is working with that. And a lot of times too, and this is something else that we've kind of found over the years, is so if you have guys who are running, folks who are running AEM, and they're operationally in charge of AEM, and this was my job for a lot of years, so I know all the pain and post-traumatic stress that goes with this. Is that
we call that experience that
we call it we call it that. So a lot of times you'll run into issues that are poorly documented because AEM being a huge system with so many integration points, there's so many different ways that it can catch on fire. And so, and there's so many different ways that people have learned to do things over the years, which may or may not be a best practice. So there's all these different ways that it can just break catastrophically. So with that, a lot of times your only way of getting a solution to something is a ticket that you open with Adobe. Those tickets don't really have, unless you're hosting with Adobe and it's a priority one site down, it might be 3 weeks before you get a resolution to your question. So so that's where in some cases it makes sense to at least have the services of somebody. Again, we do this, but to have the service of a company who can go and say good, to be kind of a buffer between you and the SLA of an Adobe ticket. Like, oh yeah, you do need to actually open an Adobe ticket with this. This is a product problem. Or
being able to solve it in-house.
Or let me just help you and solve it right now. Because a lot of times what Adobe will point back and say, hey, it's a problem with your code. So sorry. And then there it goes.
If you had to name that role, what would it be? It would be like infrastructure architect or engineer or
yeah. So
support.
Naming that role has been a problem, and I've actually tried and failed a couple of times to put the right name on my LinkedIn when I was doing that as a role. But it's a combination between infrastructure architect is one way to put it. But AEM Devops is another way to do it, because a lot of times it just has to do, because unfortunately, this is an unfortunate part of the way that the AEM product is designed, is that there's a lot of ways, the way that you enter content, put pretty pictures into AEM, and the way that you change critical configuration is in the same interface. And it's by design. And that was one of the selling points of it at first, is everything's content, but it's also a problem. And so people can change a critical runtime configuration with the click of a button that can have huge ramifications, and then untangling that is difficult. So DevOps is a big deal. Turning this kind of thing into infrastructure as code is a big deal. So that also involves, though, lots and lots of monitoring expertise, because of how complicated it is. There is a million different ways that it can explode, and you want to have all of those on a graph. This has always been kind of like my North Star, which has really served me really well, is that with any site does different things. Yes, it will serve pages, but it'll also connect to different things, publish things at different times. Sometimes it's got a commerce system. Sometimes it's got a database. Sometimes it's got a this or that. Anything that's super important to the site should be on a graph, and you should be able to see its performance, how it is right now, and and you should be able to see on that graph when it starts to keel over, before it keels over.
Right.
And so, and if
Proper
you can do that,
rating, proper response.
yes, yes. So, and then, because then you can put thresholds on those graphs and get alerts where they matter, because it's the traditional DevOps guy problem of, or the sysadmin problem of alert overload. And when it's always just pinging you with like, oh, high CPU this and all this, and you're just like, I just turned off those emails.
Right.
And, you go, why did it go down? Well, you're like, I turned off those emails. So
we've been running into that, but it's getting a lot better.
Yeah.
Just for the DevOps situation there. So I can see that being a very commonplace issue.
But that whole single pane of glass on that customer too. That's one of those ones that just like you just keep sticking stuff on there until it's all on there. And that's where also selecting the right tool that can do that. And this is one of these ones too, where on the subject of not being the sales buffer, sales, enemy of sales guy. Monitoring tools, that is one where I had to say, guys, you got to spend the money on the monitoring tools. Select one that works. Here are the ones that I know that can work with your situation. You got to buy one, or you can just decide you're just going to keep going down, because I've seen that too. And where they're like, oh yeah, we've got everything cached. It's all good. Like, okay, good. Well, every uncached page has been dead for 8 hours. And were you aware of that? You weren't aware of that because you didn't have any of these things graphed. So some of these things are really kind of serious, and so it's really good to have that role properly manned. This is one where, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how important is it for like the DevOps or the monitoring and support team to be AEM experienced? I'm thinking of someone who might be migrating to AEM. Would that DevOps team then need to be trained, or is it going to be kind of a natural switch to them? Or
no, it's not natural. It's not natural. It feels very unnatural. In fact, most people who've done sysadmin. So there's some things where if you've done it before, you can get trained up fast. Like if you've done a bunch of other Java application monitoring, you work with JBoss or Glassfish or Tomcat or Solar. A lot of these ones, if you manage big arrays of those things, you can get the feel of AEM, provided you've got a mentor, somebody who can kind of show you all the ropes. There is basically no AEM operational training, even from Adobe. So there's a couple pieces of it, but it's one of the hardest skills to learn, because you just basically have to have sites that go down for a long time and then you learn it. Unless you have somebody.
So you're going to be relying, at least initially, on the experienced architect or the person who's been there, done that AEM.
That's right. That's right. Which is again one of these ones where like I love the idea of working myself out of a job, because I feel like that really provides a value that is a value, not just making myself invaluable that you can never fire me kind of a thing. Because that's the more traditional sysadmin, like, oh, you can't ever struck my long gray certification, and I just okay, yes, well, only I know about this, where all the skeletons are hidden. If I can train up a bunch of sysadmins on how to be successful on that, then that's just super great, because that is a hole right now in AEM world of being able to do that. But in terms of and also in terms of like, is this something that you could have in-house? Even if you've got a software as a service thing, like even if you're using AEM Cloud Service, you still need ops guys. You still need somebody's got to be wearing that ops hat, because, and I'm sure you've seen this on your project too, is that it doesn't matter what SLA such and such a company has on their service, it's going to go down sometime. There's going to be a reason why it doesn't work. Oh yeah, we were up the whole time. Okay, then were you rate limiting me? Oh yeah, we were rate limiting you. Okay, good. It wasn't a DDoS. We were, you were down. As far as we were concerned, you were down. And so so somebody has to have their eyes on it, even if each service supposedly has ops guys. it still needs somebody with their eyes on the pulse, the finger on the, you know, like, good, is this patient alive? Is this patient alive?
If it needs to be up, you better be checking.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Unless you don't care, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, fine. Like back to like, you know, the dentist office thing. If the dentist office website is down for 24 hours, you know, nobody's teeth fell out of their head. But if you're a bank and nobody could pull rates that entire day, those are how many customers you just lose, or how much customer reliance and trust did you lose when your own website went down? You're like, I don't know about that bank. I don't know about that as a place to put my money, you know, sort of a thing. So it's but yeah, that infrastructure architect, kind of the AEM specialized sysadmin guy, I don't think that is something that any company should require that they have in-house. Because like I said, because you can't train them, you can't make them, and there's not a lot of them. So there's not a lot of AEM sysops guys around. They mostly work for Adobe. I would probably say 90% of the ones out there work for Adobe right now. So so it's tough. It's tough. So that's the kind of thing where, yeah, you can train up guys, or get an architect who knows AEM to say, good, you know, bring these guys up to speed, work with them for the next year, you know, and then you know, let's build some sysadmin guys out of all that. So one of the things, I mean, we're getting toward the end here. One of the things that I want to bring up too is that there's a couple other architects and people that you commonly have on a project like this, which are their own thing. Sometimes they get kind of glommed into AEM, but they're not, and they're their own thing. For example, Adobe Commerce, or whatever commerce platform you happen to be using. You know, your Magento, Hybris, Shopify, you know, stuff like that. So those have their own architects. They can know about AEM. You don't have to, if you're going to implement a commerce platform, you don't have to have AEM guys. Those people can work together. Your AEM architects can work together with whoever's a Shopify architect. That totally works. And there is overlap in both of those two. You're like, yeah, you should know a thing or two about AEM if you're a Shopify person or if you're a Hybris person. And likewise, you should know the basics of how SAP Commerce works if you're going to be implementing. But you don't have to have AEM on their resume. Adobe Experience Platform is confusingly also, you know, people think it's the same thing as AEM. It's not. It's its own thing. It's a whole customer data platform, and you don't need to have AEM experience to implement AEP. And AEP can be implemented on things that aren't AEM. So that's its own series of experts. And most of the time, if you get an AEM architect, you say, hey, can you implement my AEP solution? Most of the time they'll say, no, I don't know anything about that. So because it's a completely different product, completely new product. So so that is that. So that's the end of my list. So
is there, now that we've kind of gone through the list, are there a couple like high level points for any of these roles where you'd want to compare and say, this is what's going to lean you towards hiring a person, this is what's going to maybe lean towards hiring some consultants, more temporary work?
Yeah. Okay. All right. High level stuff. Okay. So one of them is that so every project to be successful that I've ever found. So even if, let's just say you're going to say, okay, good, we just don't have the continuous budget and we can't get headcount to hire a lot of these in-house, because I've seen that. You need to have at least a couple of people who really own the whole thing and own the relationship with vendors and really understand the site and how it's put together. These people have to be semi-technical. And because that sort of thing is required. Otherwise, because I've seen this too, where somebody says, all right, you're going to run this thing, right? And then they just say, over to you. And then you don't have, you say, oh, what about this? What about your roadmap? What about this thing broke? Is this important? You don't have anybody who's really kind of holding that down and is a reliable interface point to get everything done. So you have to have ideally people who are holding that down. So that whole product and that whole product owner role has to be really sufficiently held for the size of the project. Ideally, also, you have at least one person, even if you're hiring out most of your other stuff, at least one person who's an AEM architect on your staff, or is an AEM lead on your staff, and at least one person who is good at doing AEM design work on your staff, because doing that sort of thing with SOWs with outside companies all the time can just lead to stacked up user stories, where somebody says, hey, I want this thing, I really always wanted the tab to have a offset color and a drop shadow. Can we just do that? And then if you're like, okay, sorry, we have to wait until such and such a company has signed their new SOW, you're like, that's just a poor internal experience. Nobody likes that. So to have a couple of those people on site, on staff, who can do that sort of thing, and then you can plug in solution architects, more developers, and so forth for big renovations, where you're going to go and do either a big upgrade, a big migration, something like that, and then have those guys roll up. Ideally, again, with teaching people how to fish instead of fishing for them, as much as possible, because again, these AEM developers are very expensive. They're tough to keep on staff, because once you train up an AEM architect and you started them off as a developer and now they're an architect, they're going to realize that they can get an architect salary, and then suddenly they're not working for a company anymore. So that is, it's tough to keep a whole crew on staff doing that. There's a couple places that I've seen that have done that successfully, and I'm just kind of like, well, I mean, wow, because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to keep that whole staff together on a site like that.
Very expensive as well, I imagine.
It's expensive. It's expensive. You have to have, you have to have a whole org that understands how much running an AEM site costs, and already have that budget. And they don't say, oh, okay, good. So a couple guys, okay, oh, here we go, folks that are, what's the running rate? 75K, and you find out that some of these people are, 3-4 times that, and you're like, how much does WordPress cost?
Right.
And yeah, and unfortunately too, and I guess that's the other thing, is that one thing that anybody who's done this on a big experience platform, whether you're talking about AEM or something composable like your Strappy based site, there is it's still, you still have the same number of problems to solve no matter what tool you're using. And whether you're using a basic tool that you hardly paid anything for, and now you have to pay lots more people to try to glue it together, or whether the tool is more capable, you're still paying people to integrate it. You just have to appropriately set your budget there. Well, good. And unfortunately, I don't know that I totally answered the question as to things that need to be on staff and things to be in-house. But
right.
and I guess like a true architect, it depends.
Yeah.
It does depend.
And, luckily, there's companies like ours, or our companies, you can come ask us and say, hey, we're staffing up for a big project. Who do we need? And we're the guys who can help you out with that problem.
Yep. Indeed. Well, thanks for having this chat with me. I really hope this is useful. And I hope, if I have one recruiter that listens to this and is able to be more effective hiring, then that's great. And we'll maybe we should do our next one just centered all around the composable CMS, because it'd be interesting to see how many of these roles switch and change when you're outside of Adobe World. All right, great, good. Well, then thanks for listening, and catch you next time.
Yeah. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, guys.